I heard the whisper like it was a sentence. I was at the grocery store, buying rice and beans, when two neighbors stopped behind me, thinking I wouldn't hear. "Did you see her son? That boy goes to places that aren't for decent people," said one, lowering her tone but not hiding the venom. The other responded, almost laughing. "Doesn't surprise me with the upbringing he had. He even looks like a good boy, but blood doesn't lie." My hands trembled as I held the bag of beans. My heart raced, as if it wanted to jump out of my mouth. What were they insinuating about my son? I'd always heard small provocations my hair called nappy, my way of speaking seen as uneducated, but now it was different. It was my son's name they were throwing on the ground, and that pierced my chest like a knife. I pretended not to hear, but my whole body burned. The sound of shopping carts being dragged seemed distant. I could only think about what those women were implying. They said they had seen my son in places that decent people don't frequent, in the company of dangerous people. It was as if each word pushed me into an abyss of doubt. I returned home with my eyes fixed on the street, not seeing properly. At every corner, I remembered his childhood, his first steps, the boy's smile when he brought me flowers stolen from the school garden. And now those sharp tongues planted doubt that maybe I had never really known the man he had become. Inside the house, silence weighed more than any noise. I sat in the armchair and stared at his graduation photo, the wide smile, the blue gown. My heart said, "It's a lie, it's envy, it's prejudice." But another whisper, deeper, asked me, "What if it's not? What if you're the last to see?" Night fell, and the neighbor's words continued to haunt me like a cursed echo. I closed my eyes trying to sleep, but each shadow in the room seemed to repeat the insinuations. Then I realized there was no turning back. If I wanted to protect my son, I needed to know the truth. And there was only one way to do that, looking with my own eyes, even if it destroyed me inside. That night, lying in bed, I realized I wouldn't be able to rest until I discovered what my son was hiding from me. From early on, I learned that a woman like me was only heard when she screamed very loudly, and even then rarely. Black, 62 years old, retired nurse, skin marked by time and endless shifts, I carried on my face the story of someone who supported a family alone after her husband's death. My son was my pride, the reason I endured so many looks of contempt, so many closed doors. But in recent years, something had changed. Family meals, once full of laughter, had turned into uncomfortable silences. My daughter-in-law treated me like an uncomfortable presence, dropping phrases coated with politeness that hid poison. "You must be tired," she would say when I tried to participate in a conversation. "This subject is too complicated. It's not for everyone." They were small stabs, always accompanied by a sweet smile to disguise them. I knew what she meant, that I had no place there. My son, sitting at the head of the table, pretended not to hear. Sometimes I noticed his lowered eyes, as if he felt ashamed of me. With each dinner, my voice diminished, until only the sound of cutlery hitting plates remained. I became invisible inside my own house. This invisibility hurt more than words. It hurt because I had sacrificed so much for him to study, so he wouldn't feel on his skin the hardness I felt. And now, it was as if all that effort was forgotten, swept under the rug by an arrogant daughter-in-law and an increasingly distant son. The neighbor's comment at the market had found fertile ground of doubts within me. Did I really know the man he had become? Or was I blinded by a mother's love, believing in an image that no longer existed? I decided I wouldn't wait for more empty answers. If there was something hidden, I would discover it. No matter the risk, no matter the pain. The truth had to come to light. And it was at that instant, alone in the room, that I made a silent promise I would follow my son. I would go after each of his steps, even if my heart begged me not to see what was behind that good boy mask. If I had given up there, I might never have discovered the truth. And that's why I tell you, follow my story to the end, subscribe so you don't miss any detail of this revelation. The next night, I prepared myself like someone going to battle. I wore a dark blouse, tied back my gray hair, and put on silent shoes. I waited for my son to leave, pretending I was going to sleep early. When I heard the door slam, my heart jumped. I followed behind him, keeping my distance, like a shadow on the asphalt wet with drizzle. The streets were almost deserted, lit only by streetlights that cast yellow patches on the ground. Each of his steps was a punch to my chest, What I was about to discover could forever change the image I carried of him. I walked slowly, controlling my breathing, remembering the old hospital shifts when I needed to be firm even in the face of death. He turned the corner and entered a street where the cars were very different from what we usually see in our neighborhood. Imported machines, shining like jewels under the moonlight, parked in front of a luxurious house with high wrought iron gates. The illuminated facade revealed white columns, silk curtains in the window. I had never been in a place like that. I approached slowly, hiding behind a tree. My son rang the doorbell. A man in a tie opened and greeted him with a fake smile, one of those that doesn't reach the eyes. I watched through the gap. Inside there was a hall full of men in suits, wine glasses in hand, talking quietly. All white, all with that air of people who believe the world belongs to them. My son entered with his head down, with a humble look. He didn't seem like a guest. He seemed like a subordinate. I saw when one of them patted his shoulder, like someone praising an obedient employee. His smile was small, almost embarrassed. There, in the window's reflection, I realized it wasn't a meeting between equals. It was a power game. My stomach churned. What was he doing in that place? Why had he never told me? The muffled sound of conversations hit me like a distant buzzing, but enough to realize that nothing there was clean. With each gesture, each look, it seemed clear that my son was trapped in something he couldn't control. When I heard him calling one of them "sir," my soul broke. The boy I raised with so much sacrifice was now bowing before men who saw him only as a tool. And at that instant, with the cold cutting through my skin and my heart beating irregularly, I knew the truth was much darker than I imagined. The cold wind cut through my coat, but the flame inside me burned stronger. I continued watching through the half-open window. The voices mixed with the clinking of glasses, but I could distinguish the tone of superiority. One of them laughed loudly, saying, "This boy is useful, does what we need without raising suspicion." Another added, "It's good to have someone like that, a face that nobody respects, but who does the dirty work for us?" My whole body froze. They didn't see my son as a partner, but as a disposable instrument. They called him the reliable black guy. Those words, spat with such contempt, echoed inside me like gunshots. I felt a tear roll down, but my hands were steady. I took from my pocket the small recorder I used to record my nursing notes. I pressed the button, so hard that my fingers turned white. The click was almost imperceptible, but to me it sounded like thunder. I recorded every word, every laugh, every humiliation. I looked at my son's face and saw in him a mixture of submission and shame. He didn't dare raise his eyes, didn't dare contest. It was as if he had sold his own soul in exchange for a place that would never be given to him. The atmosphere inside was suffocating, even from afar. The smell of cigars escaped through the window, mixed with the expensive aroma of imported whiskey. The heavy curtains hid secrets, but I was extracting them in fragments with my recorder. Suddenly, one of the men hit the table and said, "If he fails, we know what to do. People like him can't expose us." The entire hall laughed, and my son just lowered his head. I felt my heart break into 1,000 pieces. It wasn't just about money or business. It was about dignity. They used him, mocked him, and still he accepted it. I closed my eyes for an instant, fighting the urge to invade that place and pull him out of there. But I controlled myself. If I acted without proof, I would be the hysterical old woman, the exaggerated mother, the black woman nobody takes seriously. With trembling hands, I pressed the recorder even tighter in my pocket. I already had the first proof, and that proof wouldn't just be my salvation, but the key to bringing them all down. In the morning, I tried to fake normalcy, but inside me a storm raged. I sat at the breakfast table, placed the cup in front of my son, and waited for him to look at me. He didn't look. He kept his eyes fixed on his phone, sliding his finger without really paying attention. I watched him in silence, trying to find in his face the boy who once held my hand with confidence. I gathered courage and asked where he had been the night before. He swallowed hard, said only with friends. The lie came out too easily. Before I could retort, my daughter-in-law entered the kitchen. She wore a facade smile, one of those that shine brighter than the voice itself. With friends, of course. "He's a busy man, Mrs. Marisa. You should trust more." Her words sounded like sweetened poison. My son remained silent, letting his wife speak for him. I insisted, I said I had seen him leaving the house, that I noticed his nervousness. It was then that she, with half-closed eyes and a mocking laugh, shot back. You're seeing things. It's age, you know. Imagine if we were to listen to every senseless suspicion. The words cut me. It was more than an accusation of madness. It was an attempt to erase my voice, to push me to the place of old, disposable woman that nobody listens to. I looked at my son, hoping he would defend his mother. He said nothing. He just stirred his coffee, avoiding my eyes. At that instant, I understood the weight of loneliness. The son I raised, whom I fed with calloused hands, preferred to hide behind silence rather than defend me. My daughter-in-law looked at me like someone looking at furniture out of place, annoying, but still inside the house. I went to the room, swallowing my tears. But instead of surrendering to pain, I felt something different being born inside me. A cold, silent anger that doesn't scream or break things, but plans. If nobody heard me, I would speak in another way. And it was there, in the darkness of my room, that I promised myself I would transform that pain into a weapon. Because I was no longer just a mother trying to protect her son, I was becoming the woman who would expose the truth before everyone. Have you ever felt the pain of being ignored by your own family? If so, like and leave your comment. Maybe your story echoes mine, and together we can transform silence into strength. I waited for the house to fall asleep to begin my search. The hallway was immersed in shadow, lit only by the weak light that escaped from the living room lamp. I walked slowly, feeling the cold of the floor on my feet. My heart beat like a drum, each step accompanied by the fear of being discovered. I entered my son's room. His smell was still there, a mixture of cheap deodorant and impregnated smoke. I opened drawers, searched through shelves, but everything seemed ordinary. Until, behind a pile of poorly folded shirts, I found an old notebook with a torn cover. My hands trembled as I opened it. The pages were covered with hurried notes. Dates, numbers, high values, names of people I recognized from the city, businessmen, politicians, influential merchants. Some of them had already been mentioned in newspapers for corruption, but nothing had been proven. My son noted every detail, as if he were a hidden accountant of that scheme. The musty smell of the pages stuck to my nose, as if it were the stench of rot hidden there. I ran my fingers over the letters blurred by sweat, and each line seemed like a sentence. It wasn't just extra work. He was immersed in something that could destroy him. I sat on the edge of the bed, holding the notebook against my chest. The weight wasn't just of the paper, but of the reality that was revealing itself. My son was entangled in a web that went far beyond what I imagined. And now I had the proof in my hands. At that instant, a certainty invaded me. It wasn't enough to save my son. I needed to pull him from those claws and, at the same time, unmask those who used him as a disposable piece. The notebook wasn't just the key to his ruin, it was the weapon to bring down all those who hid behind crystal glasses and expensive suits. I closed my eyes and breathed deeply. Fear still haunted me, but it was no longer enough to stop me. What was before me was bigger than silence, bigger than humiliation. I realized it wasn't enough to protect what remained of my family. It was necessary to expose the entire rot. And for the first time in a long time, I felt I wasn't alone. Truth now walked with me, written on pages stained with sweat. I spent days swallowing insults like someone drinking poison in small doses. My daughter-in-law continued with her venomous comments, always disguised as concern. "You should rest. You don't understand these modern things," she would say, smiling as if it were a favor to keep me quiet. I responded only with silence. That's what gave me strength. Silence that observes, that waits, that calculates. While pretending fragility, I plotted each step. The notebook was hidden inside the cover of an old recipe book from my mother, stored on the shelf. The recorder I always kept with me, in my coat pocket. I couldn't risk losing any of the evidence. It was then that I sought someone I could trust. I remembered Augusto, a journalist I knew from my youth when I still participated in neighborhood community meetings. He owed me favors, and more than that, he had courage. I arranged a discreet meeting in a hidden cafe, away from the city's eyes. When I opened my purse and placed the recorder and notebook on the table, he widened his eyes. He leafed through the pages slowly, and his face paled. "This here is dynamite," he said in a low voice. I just nodded, keeping a firm tone. and I wanted to explode in the right place. We talked for hours. He explained to me how he could record everything, how to spread the truth in a way that nobody could deny. But it was my phrase that sealed our pact. I don't want hidden revenge. I want everyone to see who they really are. In the following days, I continued my routine as if nothing had happened. I smiled at my daughter-in-law, collected the dishes, even accepted when she treated me like a maid inside my own house. Inside, each gesture of hers fed my fire. I knew the ideal stage was approaching. My daughter-in-law's birthday was coming. A big party, with politicians, businessmen, neighbors, all those who loved to look at me as if I were part of the furniture. It would be perfect. There, before everyone, the truth would tear the silk curtains and nobody could pretend they didn't see. The date was set, and for the first time in a long time, I felt that it wasn't me who was cornered. It was them. The day of the party arrived dressed in luxury. The house was illuminated by expensive chandeliers, and soft music mixed with the clinking of crystal glasses. Women displayed silk dresses, men in starched suits exchanged rehearsed greetings, and I was just the shadow in the corner of the room. At least that's how they saw me. I carried with me my purse, simple, worn by time, but inside it rested something much more precious than any jewel displayed that night, the recorder and the notebook. While everyone smiled, toasted, and pretended friendship, I felt the weight of truth beating against my chest, asking to be revealed. The looks didn't take long to fall on me. A neighbor commented too loudly, "She even came here? Doesn't she have anything else to do at home?" Another guest, laughing, murmured, "Looks like a maid lost in the hall." I breathed deeply, held tight to the purse strap, and let each word be stored as fuel. My son circulated among the guests, smiling nervously. I saw the sweat on his forehead, the discomfort hidden under the good boy mask. My daughter-in-law, in contrast, reigned in the center of the hall, distributing fake hugs, feeling like a queen for one night. It was when I felt a light touch on my arm. I turned and found Augusto, the journalist, disguised among the guests with a wine glass in his hand. Nobody suspected his presence. He nodded discreetly and whispered, "Everything is ready. The transmission is already live. The moment is yours." My heart accelerated. The hall seemed to shrink. The laughter sounded distant. The music stopped for an instant, and that brief silence was like a signal. There, before all those who always looked down on me, I understood that the time of submission was over. I breathed deeply, straightened my shoulders, and felt courage grow inside me like an uncontrollable flame. When the entire hall turned for the toast, I raised my voice. The room froze. Silence fell like a heavy veil. And at that instant, I decided it was my turn to speak. Stories like this need to be heard. Share this video so more people understand the weight of silence and courage. The glasses were still raised when my voice cut through the hall like a blade. Before this toast, I have something to say. The looks turned to me, some with impatience, others with that polite contempt I already knew. My daughter-in-law frowned, forcing an embarrassed smile. "Leave that for later, you're disrupting things." But I didn't stop. I opened my purse slowly, like someone revealing a secret kept for years. I took out the recorder and pressed the button. The businessmen's voices echoed through the hall. "This boy is useful, does what we need without raising suspicion. It's good to have someone like that. A face that nobody respects, but who does the dirty work for us." Laughter and chorus filled the environment. The shock was immediate. The glasses lowered, the smiles disappeared. Some guests brought their hands to their mouths. Others looked at my son with incredulity. He turned pale, his eyes wide, unable to react. My daughter-in-law screamed, trying to muffle, "That's a lie. Cheap setup. She's delirious." It was then that Augusto, the journalist, stepped forward. He connected the notebook to an improvised projection on a computer screen linked to the party's projector. The pages opened before everyone, revealing names, dates, values. And as if that weren't enough, the live transmission was already running on the internet, showing hundreds of people what was happening there. The hall became a whirlwind. The businessmen present stood up, trying to leave in a hurry, but guests surrounded them, stunned by the revelations. My son collapsed in a chair, his hands covering his face. I watched him with a divided heart, pain for what he had become, but also relief that finally the truth was no longer hidden. My daughter-in-law tried to approach me, her eyes sparkling with hatred. "You destroyed your own family," she spat. But I faced her firmly, without trembling. "I wasn't the one who destroyed it. It was the lies you chose to live." And at that instant, I realized something I had never felt before. Everyone was looking at me. I was no longer invisible. I was the voice that broke through the hall. The siren cut through the night air a few minutes later. The doors opened, and uniformed men entered the hall with firm steps. The journalist had warned the police, previously delivering copies of the material. Now, there was no more hiding anything. The businessmen, previously haughty, shrank in despair. One of them tried to offer money, whispering to the police officers, but was immediately handcuffed under the astonished looks of the guests. The metallic sound of the handcuffs echoed like a sentence of justice. My daughter-in-law, who until then felt like the queen of the party, was livid. The perfect makeup no longer hid the fury and fear stamped on her face. She tried to argue, saying that everything was a setup by the envious mother-in-law, but nobody listened to her. The weight of the evidence was higher than any lie. My son, my son. He trembled, his eyes red, his hands sweaty. When the police approached, he suddenly stood up, crying like a boy. He fell to his knees before me, asking for forgiveness. "Mom, I didn't want to. I didn't know how to get out of this." His words were almost inaudible amid the commotion. I felt the looks around me. Those who always saw me as a burden now observed me with respect and amazement. I, the old woman who served as a shadow in the corners, had brought to light the rot they preferred to ignore. One of the police officers confirmed before everyone, "The evidence is incontestable." "You were brave, ma'am. If it weren't for your determination, maybe none of this would have come to light." His words went through me like a bomb. For the first time in years, I was recognized not as a burden, not as useless, but as the woman who brought truth to light. My son sobbed, trying to hold on to the hem of my dress. I stared at him, my heart heavy, but my voice firm. There, before everyone, I understood that something was still missing, the word that would close everything, not just for him, but for all who witnessed that scene. And with that certainty burning inside me, I breathed deeply. I was ready to give the final word. The hall, taken by silence, waited for my reaction. All eyes were on me. Curious neighbors, incredulous guests, serious police officers. The brightness of the lights reflected in the abandoned glasses, and the air seemed heavier than ever. My son was still kneeling, crying. My daughter-in-law, with crossed arms, her face contorted with anger, tried to maintain a haughty posture, but her mask was already in pieces. It was then that I raised my chin and let my voice echo through the hall. Shame is not making mistakes. Shame is persisting in error and bowing before those who humiliate us. I raised you to be a man, not a shadow of others. To walk with your head high, not with your eyes glued to the ground. Each word came out heavy, like a hammer hitting iron. The hall remained in absolute silence. It was as if even breathing had been suspended. My daughter-in-law tried to interrupt. "Enough, you've talked too much." But one of the guests, previously indifferent, silenced her. Let her speak. This voice needs to be heard. For the first time, I saw respect in the eyes of those who always treated me as invisible. I continued, "All of you who think you own this world use people like my son to do what you don't have the courage to assume. And you still laugh at him for being black, as if skin color were a passport to servitude. But today, before everyone, the truth can no longer be buried. The mask has fallen." My son cried in silence, and I knew my words weren't just for him. They were for every look of contempt that had ever pierced me, every silence they tried to impose on me. And at that instant, I felt something different course through my body. I was no longer the quiet, invisible, humiliated woman in the corners of the house. I was a voice that finally found its place, and I realized with a strange calm that my story didn't end there. In fact, it was just beginning. The next morning, I woke up with a feeling I hadn't known for a long time, lightness. Not because everything was resolved my son would still have to face the consequences, the entire city would murmur about the scandal, but because, for the first time, I didn't feel erased. I walked down the street with my head held high. The neighbors who used to whisper behind my back now stared at me with amazement, some even with respect. The same mouth that spread poison now whispered about my courage. It was as if, suddenly, they had discovered that I existed. At home, the silence was different. Not the heavy silence of indifference, but the silence of those who fear and respect. My daughter-in-law locked herself in the room, unable to sustain eye contact with me. My son, dejected, tried to get back on his feet. I didn't reject him, but I also didn't spare him. I told him that reconstruction doesn't begin with apologies, but with different choices. And that dignity isn't bought with money, but conquered with truth. At night, I sat alone on the porch. The wind caressed my gray hair, and I remembered each humiliation I endured in silence. The looks of disdain, the phrases disguised as kindness, the moments when my own voice was treated as annoying. I realized that my victory wasn't just in exposing those powerful men, but in showing that kindness never meant weakness. For the first time in decades, I felt that the entire city had seen who I was, a black, mature woman who transformed pain into a weapon and silence into a scream. I looked at the starry sky and whispered, "Never invisible again." And I say to you who hear me now, never let them erase your voice. You are not a burden, you are not leftovers, you are not invisible. You are roots, strength, truth. If this story touched you, subscribe. There are many other voices like mine waiting to be heard.